before I forget. And I know we haven't sent out the last couple ones, Scott.
I'll do it.
Okay.
This morning, it for some reason had last week's meeting ID, and I can't tell by looking that it's last week's. And so the room camera was not logged in. Sorry for the delay.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Great crowd online and in person. And we are doing a 2-week study on joy and rejoice. But before that, we should pray.
We should. Yes.
Please continue to keep Cherie and Phil, who live in Rockport. He's got Parkinson's and she had a small stroke. And keep them in your prayers. Keep Kelly in your prayers for pain. Keep our Cheryl in your prayers. She's got lots of stress from work and her shingles are acting up again, her pain. So please keep her. Continued Thanksgiving for this one. He went floundering last night, so you know he's feeling better. And he got 2 flounders, so I know what we're having for dinner.
I got a big flounder and a giant flounder, so yeah.
And so he goes, I went to bed. He goes floundering. When I say he goes floundering, it's like in the middle of the night by himself. Luckily, Julie was up because I said, "Did you leave me a note?" And he said, "No, I told Julie." I'm like, because, can you imagine waking up the next morning? He's not back from floundering. I have no idea where he was. But
Flounder season opened up at midnight, and I really had no choice. My muscles, though, are still, this medicine, it just eats muscles. It destroys them. And so just from carrying around the flounder gig, my muscles hurt, but I was able to go. So we're real pleased.
Yes.
Awesome.
God, we come thankful because we're blessed. We forget sometimes, even when things are not going well, that we're blessed in so many ways. We're blessed with this gift of each other, with the communion that we have, and we're thankful. We live in a world that is confusing at times when we look at the news, and yet we see your hand and we're thankful. We have these that we bring, it seems like every week. You know our concern, and you know that you're the reason we're concerned, that we have that in our heart. We're made in your image. And so we are concerned about them, and we ask for your hand, we ask for your healing, we ask for your peace and their joy. Remember us as we study that, as we go into this season. Amen. Amen. And Kelly, the website that we need to get on cannot be accessed from Mary's work computer, and she was in San Antonio, so you'll hear from us today.
Like I said, we are starting a 2-week study on joy and rejoice. And as we said, we wanted to finish up Revelation because we didn't think that was really a Christmas thing. And joy and rejoice, we hear about it all the time, and especially during the holidays. And so a couple of things about today, we're going to look at the Old Testament, look at joy and rejoice, and next week the New Testament. But just a couple of overviews of what this is and what this isn't.
Yeah, there were a couple of things we thought we wanted to say. For one, we if you're not careful, this kind of thing will lapse into a self-help or Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, and it's not that at all. And the other thing is, we've sort of been through this before, and talking about the difference between happiness and joy. I've gone to 100 different sources and experts and everything, and it's hard. I mean, if you don't have words for it, you probably don't know it that well. We contend that there is a difference, and we certainly contend that in this context, we're talking about something that's biblical, something that involves God and God's presence, and it is different from what's usually called happiness. We're going to try and talk about that a little bit.
And we're going to go over a couple of them right now. So the first one was that, if you look at the difference between happiness and we'll call it joy from now on, but as Scott says, the secular world has stolen the word joy also. But what we're talking about the next 2 weeks is biblical joy. From now on, we'll just call it joy. But joy transcends circumstances. Thoughts?
Well, and the second half of that a lot of the time it's illogical. I mean, people will see joy in a person and look at their circumstances and say, that doesn't even make sense. And it's true to people that don't understand what we're talking about. It doesn't make sense. And maybe that's the easiest way to spot the difference, that it's not totally dependent on circumstances. And we've known many times that you look at them and you want to just say, oh, you poor thing, and yet they're still joyful. Going into Christmas, we know a lot of people struggle during the holidays. A lot of people have a very hard time. And that's part of the reason for going through this study, is to talk about having joy when circumstances may not seem to agree with it.
When we were talking, there was another thought about the need for a stimulus with happiness.
Yeah, waiting for something to come down and deliver joy to you. I'm waiting for something a stimulus to come along, something to come along and allow me to feel joy. And we miss out often on the joy that we should have, the life more abundant, doing exactly that.
And before we get started, and we're going to get started on a Bible verse here shortly, but the HEB or Walmart challenge versus looking at don't have and can't have.
I'm glad you have notes. This is, as we studied this week, this is one of the things that I told Mary I should mention. Go to HEB or Walmart and sit in the parking lot for a few minutes and study the people going into the store, and you will not see a lot of joy. It's amazing. The joy, I think, by and large, is visible. When you do see someone, you can sense it, or you can pick up on it fairly readily. But I watch things all the time, but sit in the parking lot at HEB or Walmart, and right now people are Christmas shopping, and even inside the store, oh, they're just miserable. They're just absolutely miserable. So I just have this belief this is not how this season should be. But if you want to, if you go in the opposite route, instead of saying this is what joy looks like, I can show you what it doesn't look like. Go do my test.
And when we talk about that whole idea of stimulus, as Scott says, most of the people that are going into Walmart or HEB, they might not be rich, but they have funds. They have money.
That's true. That was another thing that we talked about. We have, and I don't know if it's just this country, maybe it's humans forever, but we feel like somehow we're missing out on something. But that little test of going to Walmart or HEB parking lot, the people that are there clearly have some money. They're going in to buy things, right? I mean, I don't know if they have what they would say is enough, but they're not destitute, or they wouldn't be going into the store to buy things. And yet we as a species tend to almost ritually feel like we just don't have enough, and if you listen to people, I have some relatives that just believe they're being cheated, that somehow life is not delivering to them all the things that they're entitled to and they deserve. We are blessed. And in this country, and certainly in this group, we are very much blessed. So that's part of what we want to look at in this.
So as we're gonna start with the Old Testament, and we're gonna start with Psalm 37. And one of the first premises we put out a couple premises already. The next premise we want to put out there is that joy does require your participation. We're careful to say that it's a choice. You want to explain that a little bit more? But it does require an action.
It is one of those things that People who are not feeling joyful don't want to hear you say it's a choice, because you're implying that somehow I'm doing something wrong. The reason I'm not joyful, I'm not experiencing joy, is because I'm not doing what I should be doing. A Bible scholar, a Hebrew scholar that I really respect, I read something he wrote one time, and I think it's probably true, but he says every Hebrew verb is an action verb. And I don't know if it's every single one, but it's something very, very close. And when we start reading things in the Bible about joy, what you find over and over is that it does require some action from us. There's a reason for that. I mean, God may extend an offer, but it also requires some action on our part. But I don't want to get in that trap of making it sound so easy that it sounds like that it insults people. That if you're not joyful, it's your fault. Habits are habits. But we can get in habits of not taking part in this. We can also get in habits of participation. And let's look at what that looks like. Mary's got the verses.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Psalm 37. I'm going to read 1 through 8 and then 23 and 24. Do not fret over those who do evil. Do not envy those who do wrong. For they wither quickly like grass and wilt like tender plants. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do it. He will bring forth your righteousness like the dawn, your justice like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men prosper in their ways, when they carry out wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and abandon wrath. Do not fret. It can only bring harm. And then 23 and 24. The steps of a man are ordained by the Lord, who takes delight in his journey. Though he falls, he will not be overwhelmed, for the Lord is holding his hand.
So verse 4 is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. If you're reading along, this is Psalm 37, verse 4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And when I was a kid growing up, I heard like a couple of times people using that God will give you whatever you want. He'll give you the desire, well, your heart's desire. And I knew something was wrong with that. There are a couple of things wrong with it. The first is, you notice how it starts out. It says, delight yourself in the Lord. So regardless of what comes after, there's an instruction here to delight yourself. And you notice it's not just delight in the Lord, but delight yourself. You have some responsibility in this. What does it mean to delight yourself in the Lord? And some of it, I'm convinced, has to do with observing. Step outside and just look at this place we live in. It's easy to overlook how magnificent it is. But then the other thing that I learned when I started learning a little bit about Hebrew, where it says he will give you the desires of your heart. That word give is translated almost every other time as put. He'll put the desires in your heart. And there's something to be said, for the things that we desire being a little more, I don't know, grown up, a little more the things that will bring us joy. There was a guy when I was college age that I knew well, had gone out and started a business. And part of it was being in the right place at the right time. But he worked hard, but he just made a truckload of money. He did really well. And the first thing he did was go out and buy a new Mercedes. He thought, and I knew him well enough, he thought that when he had this thing, he'd be happy. And it didn't satisfy. He didn't feel like he wanted to be important. and he wanted everybody to know he's important. And it didn't change how people perceived him. So a year or so later, he went and traded it in and bought the next model up, and it never satisfied. The desire of his heart was something that he's never going to fill that hole. So that particular verse, delight in the Lord, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will put the desires in your heart. I am absolutely convinced is a very real thing. And if you're going into the season, if you're wondering if you're not feeling the joy, delight in the Lord. Spend some time trying to get to the bottom of that, and it makes a difference. But let's go back and read. Start at verse 1. It says, do not fret over those who do evil. Do not envy those who do wrong, for they will wither quickly like grass and will wilt like tender plants. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. And you notice David is giving us, I'm not much of a fan of cookbookery when it comes to faith, but David is telling us some important things. And one of the things that gets in the way of joy, and I do observe, and I talk to people, and I go through this. Often people they look and somebody else has more than them. Somebody else got the promotion that they thought, and it's other people standing in the way of my joy. And David's sort of instruction here is don't fret over those who do evil. And I say this often enough to remind myself, but if you listen to the news, you read the internet, I got wrapped up in that. And I was fretting over people doing evil. And I was not a joyful person. I recognize that. Looking back, I don't know how any of you could stand to be around me. It will consume you. So here's instruction from David, literally. And I've already gone over 4, but you go to 5. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do it. He will bring forth your righteousness like the dawn, your justice like the noonday sun. That's an odd thing. He's talking about, experiencing this, but he'll bring forth your righteousness. He'll bring forth your justice. Commit your way to the Lord. These are instructions. And I know, sometimes when someone is in that mode where they're not feeling joy, they don't want to hear this kind of talk. And I've been through that with people. But these are pretty good instructions going into this season to consciously cultivate a habit of commit your way to the Lord.
7.
Be still before the Lord.
Yep.
And wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men prosper in their ways. And that idea of waiting on the Lord, of being patient. I go a lot of things. I like to know what's going on in the world. But I've told you recently, the world of physics is just standing on its head. They've come across new discoveries, and all of these things that they've been teaching are falling apart. And you can go read the headlines, and they're scared to death by it. But one of the things I find is that they're scared more than anything. Some of them actually said it this week. They're worried somebody will take these things that they're saying and use it to say that there is a God. They start with the presumption there's no God. But when it comes to waiting, one of the things, go on YouTube and do a search on this. There are physicists, high-level people saying time does not exist because their mathematics have failed them. And a lot of it uses Einstein's time. But I've been telling Mary for 26 years now, time doesn't exist. We think God takes a long time. What's he waiting on? Jesus came and died. That was 2,000 years. And we think, what's he waiting on? Time is not what our time appears to be. And the idea that it's been a long time really is a limitation of us. But this instruction to wait patiently on the Lord, there's another one of the flaws that we have as humans. that gets in the way of experiencing joy. Is not only do we want it, but I want it right now. And very often it's not the time for it. So
You want to do 23 and 23? This
you have
Mary,
something, Gene?
Yeah.
Couple of
Is
things.
your mic on?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, is it, yeah.
The word in this passage is delight.
Yes.
Yeah, not joy. Yeah.
Delight and joy, which is the very opening. Delight in the Lord. Because if it doesn't come from the Lord, then you're down to delight in the land, and that's not it. So it's not the same thing as joy, delight, because it's used two different ways. And only the first half of that goes to the basis of the Lord. Is that right? Am I on the right
No,
track?
you're absolutely right. And you know,
And this psalm doesn't even use the word joy, but
That's right.
But it tells us how to get there,
as we
basically.
talked about this, there are a lot of words that use joy. And in Hebrew, there are several words for joy, but they're all very much related. And the idea of delight, if you read it, the definition reads almost like joy. You hit on the point, delight yourself in the Lord. We're proposing that that's a big part of this, that it's not just delight yourself in a well-cooked meal, for instance. You can recognize God's hand in a lot of things, but this is not a thing you create out of thin air on your own. But you're right about the word. We're going to talk more about the actual words provided. I printed out, I was going to do that, and I wound up getting about 300 pages. So I'm going to, as Mary talks, I'm going to try and sort through, but the word is important.
And the last part of this that we read is the steps of a man are ordered by the Lord who takes delight in his journey. Though he falls, he will not be overwhelmed, for the Lord is holding his hand. And that last part of that verse, the Lord will be holding his hand, I think is key to this understanding that even when circumstances would make you happy, despite the circumstances, you can feel joy because you know that God is with you.
You notice, and I don't want this to sound too simplistic, and this is David. David is wonderful, and this is where his heart is. But though he fall, it doesn't say you don't fall. It doesn't say that. Mary was reading a devotional this morning because it happens to be on this idea of joy, and it talked about Jesus being a shepherd. And I pointed out that just because you have a shepherd, it doesn't mean there are no wolves. You need a shepherd for a reason. But though he fall, God will be there holding his hand. It's a marvelous image, I think.
The next thing we wanted to do is show, we've shown Bible Project videos before, and it's a good Bible, and make sure we hit the volume.
Yes. Go ahead,
I
finish your
said,
thought.
sorry, it's on joy. He usually does, the gentleman who does this usually talks about different books of the Bible, but he did one on joy. And once again, it just covers things very well. Let me see, share.
Where is share?
Right here.
Okay. Advanced sharing options.
So, all participants, hit all participants.
Oh, no, that's who can share. Where's the one where it says to keep this up? I love it because Zoom updates and we don't always know exactly what they've updated. Let's see. You can tell us if you're hearing.
Okay, so here they go.
Share sound.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And we're here. Sorry, it takes just a minute on this, and now.
Yeah.
The application. Okay, so now you just need to go down, press the start.
No, here. Here's the start. Sorry.
Being in a good mood is really great, and most languages have lots of words to describe the experience, like happy, cheerful, joyful, and so on. The same goes for the languages of the Bible. In ancient biblical Hebrew, there's a variety of words, like simcha, sason, or gil. In the Greek New Testament, there's kara, euphrosune, or agaliasis. Each word has its own unique nuance, but they all basically refer to the feeling of joy and happiness. Now, what makes these biblical joy words interesting is noticing the kinds of things that bring happiness, and also seeing how joy is a key theme that runs through the whole story of the Bible. Let's start with sources of joy. On page 1 of the Bible, God says that this world is very good. And so naturally, people find joy in beautiful and good things of life, like growing flocks or an abundant harvest on the hills. The poet of Psalm 104 says a good bottle of wine is God's gift to bring joy to people's hearts. People find joy at a wedding or in their children. There's even a Hebrew proverb that compares the joy that perfume brings to your nose with the joy a good friend brings to your heart. However, human history isn't just a joy fest. The biblical story shows how we live in a world that's been corrupted by our own selfishness. It's marked by death and loss. And this is where biblical faith offers a unique perspective on joy. It's an attitude God's people adopt, not because of happy circumstances, but because of their hope in God's love and promise. So when the Israelites were suffering from slavery in Egypt, God raised up Moses to lead them into freedom. And the first thing the Israelites did was sing for joy. Even though they were in the middle of a desert, they were vulnerable, the promised land was still far away, they rejoiced anyway. Later biblical poets looked back on this story and they remembered how the Lord caused his people to leave with joy, his chosen ones with shouts of joy. This joy in the wilderness, this was a defining moment, a way of saying that the joy of God's people is not determined by their struggles, but by their future destiny. This theme appears later in Israel's story, when Israel suffered under the oppression of foreign empires. The prophet Isaiah looked for a day when God would raise up a new deliverer like Moses. That's when those redeemed by the Lord will return to Zion with glad shouts, with eternal joy crowning their heads. Happiness and joy will overtake them. And while the Israelites waited, they chose joy to anticipate their future redemption. This is why it's significant that when Jesus of Nazareth was born, it was announced as good news that brings great joy. We're told that Jesus himself rejoiced and gave thanks to God his Father when he began to announce the kingdom of God. He even taught his followers the same joy in the wilderness, saying, when people reject you or persecute you for following me, rejoice, be very glad, because your reward is great in heaven. After his death and resurrection, Jesus commissioned his followers to go out and announce the good news that he was the risen king of the world. And as they did so, the early Christian communities were known for being full of joy, even when they were persecuted. Like when the Apostle Paul was sitting in a dirty Roman prison, he could say that he's chosen joy, even if he gets executed. He called this the joy of faith, or joy in the Lord. He believed it was the gift of God's Spirit, a sign that Jesus' presence is with you, inspiring hope in the midst of hardship. And when you believe that Jesus' love has overcome death itself, joy becomes reasonable in the darkest of circumstances. Now, this doesn't mean that you ignore or suppress your sorrow. That's not healthy or necessary. Paul often expressed his grief about missing loved ones or losing friends or his own freedom. He called it being full of sorrow and yet rejoicing. As he acknowledged his pain, he also made a choice to trust Jesus that his loss wouldn't be the final word. This is very different from the trite advice to turn that frown upside down. Christian joy is a profound decision of faith and hope in the power of Jesus' own life and love. And that's what biblical joy is all about.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
they
do a
are.
great job.
They,
Hey, thanks for watching this word study.
Uh-oh.
Lots of other videos, and they're all about showing.
They do such a good job. I want to do a commercial for it.
I'm looking at the time. I think we're going to go to Isaiah. Did you want to go to?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Or did you want to talk a little bit about the definitions of joy in Greek?
Only briefly. We'll
Yeah.
talk more next week. But one of the things that I've found going through these words is that, and it's actually both Greek and Hebrew, but it's really obvious in Greek. There's a word for joy. It's charis or charis, but there's also chara that is grace. And those words are known as cognates. They're words There's some words that are in Spanish. If you read them, you know immediately what they are, even though you don't speak Spanish, you speak English, because they're basically the same word. They're cognate. Well, joy, that word for joy and the word for grace are based on the same word. And they're so close to the same word. They're very closely related, joy and grace. But the root of both of those, which is just car, actually it has some connotations, but the main one is it has to do with to lean in. All right. It is this image of God leaning towards us, actually reaching out to us. That's what grace is, to lean into us. And we still have a responsibility for meeting him, but grace and joy, they're so close to the same word. They're two halves of the same coin. And we find it in Hebrew, the same thing with one of the main words for joy being very closely tied to, Gene, hesed.
Hesed.
It is, hesed is this undeserved gift, but it is essentially the Old Testament version of grace. And it is very much tied in to the concept of joy. You can't separate the two verbally, and they understood that when they are making language, that the two things are tied together. Let's go to Isaiah.
So Isaiah is, anytime you go to a Christmas service, you're going to hear Isaiah 9, verse 6. And I'm going to start with that, but then we're going to go back. So Isaiah 9, verse 6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Everybody has.
It's a beautiful thing, but if you've been to a Christmas service in a church, you've heard this read. You know this verse. What you probably haven't heard at those is, let's drop back to what came right before it and listen to that to put it in sort of perspective.
So I'm going to go to Isaiah 9, starting at verse 2 and reading all the way through verse 6. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people rejoice before you as they rejoice at harvest time, as a man rejoices in dividing the plunder. For as in the days of Midian, you have shattered the yoke of their burden, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. For every trampling boot of battle and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
Now, one of the things we've talked about is that often, and Isaiah is a prophet, and maybe unparalleled. Isaiah is so bold that he's not afraid to say, "Thus saith the Lord," and I don't know if envy is the right word, but I'm in awe of that. But Isaiah is a prophet, and often in prophecy, you'll hear something talked about that it's in the future, but they talk about it as if it's already happened. And I'm convinced that in the mind of the prophet, it is so certain that they talk about it like they've already seen it, like it has already occurred. But he says those walking in darkness have seen a great light. The idea of walking, of living in a world of darkness is fairly easy to relate to. And they've seen a great light. You want to read the next part?
And those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned.
You'll recognize the land of the shadow of death. David writes about it, for even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. the idea of living apart from fear is another one of the concepts. It's another one of the things that come up in these studies a lot, that we're not intended to live in fear. That will rob your joy, is that feeling. But those living in, walking in darkness have seen a great light. Those that live in the world of the shadow of death.
The biggest thing I think you need to go back is my aha moment this week was, Isaiah was 200 years before Christ, and 800 years before Christ, and he prophesies about this occurring. And as Scott says, he talks about it as if it already occurred. But what we struggle with is we're 2,000 years later.
Mary was listening to someone, as we tend to do, but they were talking about how Isaiah was looking forward to it, anticipating the arrival of the Messiah, but we own it. And I kind of laughed. I said, it was 2,000 years ago. You think it was easier on or harder on Isaiah than it? We look back and say, well, it was 2,000 years. Faith is still important to this. It was no more readily apparent, or it's no more readily apparent to us than it was to Isaiah 800 years before. And it is a big thing. We being human, we struggle with that part. Yeah,
I think that the human qualification is not applicable in the prophet. He sees it, he believes it, he has faith in it, and it's not even happening yet. It's going to come down the line, but I see it now. Isaiah does. And he feels it now, because if you don't have that trust, it's not going to go anywhere.
These prophets were special beasts. They absolutely were. But I don't think it's quite fair to just take the element of humanity. I mean, it's easy to look at Elijah, for instance, and right after Elijah faces down the prophets of Baal, he takes off and runs out to the desert because he's afraid. They're still human, but you're right. They do see things that are absolutely clear. But the beauty of that is that they leave these words for us. I mean, the faith.
And that's what leaving these words for us. I'm reading the book about prayer and how to pray some of these songs to make them more real to us. And I want to read just one of these sections as it is to us today. So I'm going to start back at 2. Instead of you, I mean, he's talking about, he's prophesizing about Christ. So I'm going to insert Christ. Christ has enlarged the nation and has increased its joy. The people rejoice before Christ, before you, and they rejoice at harvest time, as they rejoice in harvest time, as men rejoice in dividing the plunder. For as in the days of Midian, Christ has shattered the yoke of our burden and the bar across our shoulders and the rod of our oppression. And every trampling boot of battle and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. So it becomes more, like you said, if we want to see how this affects us 2,000 years later, we have to live it as Isaiah did then. So.
We said, and I said, we don't want to make this sound trite. We don't want to make it just sound like it's easy. But when it says he shattered the yoke of our burden, we often choose to keep wearing the yoke of the burden that's already been shattered. I mean, we take it on ourselves when we've been freed from it. And we'll talk more about some things that I think that'll help make that clear. But the idea that we make a choice is very apparent. Hebrew verbs are action verbs, and we still have some responsibility in this for our habits.
I think it's also a good outline for what reading this verses should tell us to look inward. Are we there? Can we get there? Do we believe? Because that belief is critical.
Let me, and I know what you're, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I know what you're saying, and I agree with you. But the idea of looking inward, one of the mistakes that I see people making, that's what a self-help book is. Help yourself. And the whole focus of this is that it is outward looking but it is looking towards God. It is the understanding that the source of the joy, the source of the shattered burden is not ourselves. We don't shatter our own burden. We don't lift our own yoke. It's a gift from God. It is grace. It is hesed. It is that undeserved gift.
It's
And
also the answer to St. Peter's comment, to whom would we go to?
Well, that's true. Not ourselves. Yeah.
which takes us, we're going to look at a hymn, and we've done this hymn before, but do you want to talk about it first? Because the other thing about Christmas, you turn on any radio station or your Amazon Music, and you can listen to all these Christmas musics, and the word joy is used all over the place. And some of them, if you listen to them, I was listening to one of them yesterday, and I'm like, this is like a really crazy hymn if you really listen to the words. I mean, but there's one that I know a couple years ago when we looked at hymns, we studied this one, but it's a good reminder, and it's a neat.
If I can get it pulled up quickly, I was kind of pulled, but I heard the bells on Christmas Day. Most people never really listen to the words to that song. I see some heads, you've been told, but Henry Wordsworth Longfellow, his wife had been burned to death. He raised children on his own. His oldest son, though, runs off and joins the war. This is the Civil War, and it's a horrible, horrible time. And he gets a telegram that his son has been shot in the face. And you can imagine that might have shattered his joy. It was not true. He had been shot in the shoulder, but it had ricocheted and nicked his spine. He missed being paralyzed literally by a part of an inch. But Longfellow is sort of now thinking about this horrible civil war, brother against brother. And he describes hearing the bells on Christmas Day, and he can't escape the weight, the burden of the Civil War. And there's a line in there where he says, and I hung my head, there is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And we feel like that at times. You look around and you say, but hate is so strong. And what he comes to, though, eventually, the last verse is the realization. But let me. It is. Yes. It is that poet exactly.
And so now, when you listen to this.
Go ahead.
Okay. There you go. Now, when you listen to this song, I think you hear it differently. And this one, I think, has the words. No, yes.
It does. That's why we picked this one, because it has the words. And let me share it. And share sound. All right. Perfect. So. Okay. Have I gotten it done quickly? Yay. Okay.
I heard the bells on Christmas Day. They're all familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And thought how as the day had come, the belfries of our Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day. A voice, a chime, a chant sublime. peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then peal the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men.
So it doesn't say that it's going to happen while we're alive. That idea is, and it just puts everything back to Revelation, that, you know, it's made right at the end. But this idea that our joy should be based on it'll be right at the end, that during the time here, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think the message on that, he certainly, after getting this word that his son had been shot in the face, he was contemplating this civil war, and it leaves, that song leaves a couple of verses out that he wrote, talking about what was going on in the war. And it is easy to look around at the world around us and lose sight of what Mary was just talking about, and to let yourself fall into that mode where you say, you know, there is no peace on earth. The hate is strong. And so, you know, that's another part of this, that we allow ourselves to become distracted. We live in a world that is broken. And yet we know, as Mary said from the study we just did, in the end, it's made right. Let's see if we can make our way to this last psalm. This is Psalm 30. I want to see, because there's some things that I really want to talk about before we're done.
Okay.
You want me to read it?
Yeah.
All right, so this is Psalm 30. I will exalt you, O Lord, for you have lifted me up and have not allowed my foes to rejoice over me. O Lord, my God, I cried to you for help, and you healed me. You spared me from descending into the pit. Sing to the Lord, O you his saints. And by the way, Gene, that's your word saints from last week. We talked about. Sing to the Lord, O you his saints, and praise his holy name. For his anger is fleeting, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay the night, but joy comes in the morning. In prosperity, I said, I will never be shaken. You favored me. You made my mountain stand strong. When you hid your face, I was dismayed. Now, I'm going to stop it there. And Mary, you might want to finish. I stopped at verse 7. But you notice he's what he says is that his anger is fleeting. And it's not necessarily anger. I know what that word is, but it has to do, he's talking about times where we feel like God has abandoned us. He's turned his face from us. And that weeping may stay the night, but joy comes in the morning. This particular word for joy is one that literally it deals with somebody shouting out loud, that kind of joy, standing and shouting. Joy comes in the morning. But here's what I want. If you're reading along, this is verse 6.
You want me to take it?
Yep.
To you, O Lord,
No, verse 6.
Oh, sorry. In prosperity, I said, I will never be shaken. O Lord, you favored me. You made my mountain stand strong. When I hid my face.
When you hid your face.
When you hid your face, I was dismayed.
In prosperity, I said, I will never be shaken. That's the story of humanity. That's the story of us. When things are going well, we say, my faith is strong and I'll never be shaken in my faith when things are going good. I hope most of you, at least, more than one or two, can relate to that. Things are going good. I'll never be shaken. But you made my mountain stand strong. When you hid your face, I was dismayed. These sentences are back to back.
And this is David.
This is David. When in prosperity, I said, I'll never be shaken. And then he turns right around and admits. And then when things start to go bad, when you hide your face, I was dismayed. We forget about that feeling of invincibility, the feeling that everything is good and will continue to be good, and then things go wrong, and suddenly we lose the faith. I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, and you will start at 8.
To you, O Lord, I called, and I begged my Lord for mercy. What gain is there in my bloodshed, in my descent to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your faithfulness? Hear me, O Lord, and have mercy. O Lord, be my helper. You turned my mourning into dancing. You peeled off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. O Lord, my God, I will give you thanks forever.
So I'm especially like this because he talks about mourning. Paul tells us to laugh with those who laugh and mourn with those who mourn. This idea of feeling joy does not mean that anybody who's mourning is doing something wrong. It's not that. It's not to indicate that we will never feel a state of mourning. But look at what he says. And he says, I turned to you, I said, hear me, O Lord, have mercy, O Lord, my helper. And then you turn my mourning into dancing. Joy comes in the morning. You turn my mourning into dancing. You peeled off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. And sackcloth was like burlap. It was something that was part of the custom that when you're in mourning, I want to wear something that makes me feel even worse. Yes, yeah, I want to wallow. But people in the Middle East mourn. We don't understand that. When someone dies, they wail, they scream, they mourn. We're I don't know if it's the British background in our culture. I don't know what it is, but we're stoic. We don't want to show it. They mourn. And he says, you peeled off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks forever.
And that word joy is a little different, right?
It is. That one is the one that has more to do with feeling this feeling of joy. But the point here is we sort of ride that roller coaster. We tend to forget, it can be in a matter of days, of hours, that we're feeling really good, and then something happens, and you see in David this idea of, I'll never be shaken, and then I turn to despair. And he says, you turned my mourning into dancing. As we studied this week, one of the things that I mentioned to Mary, I may have been guilty of this. I presume we're all guilty of this. But the more you've been around, the more you've been through, and you remember that these things don't last forever. They're not going to last forever. And we live in the shadow of death. Eventually that claims us, but we have that knowledge that even that's not the end. And the more times you've been through this and you've seen your mourning turn to dancing, the quicker I think I tend to recover and remember, oh, hey, this is no different than the last time. The circumstances may be a little different, but he delivered me before, and he delivered me the time before that, and it doesn't last forever. Joy comes in the morning. So, oh Lord my God, the closing words, I will give thanks forever, at least until the next time it turns against me and I despair. But what I do want you to see is I will give thanks. And we're going to talk more about that next week, but this idea of giving thanks is central. It's tied in very much to joy. I like to say that the more often I say thank you, the less often I need to say please. It is absolutely central. And since we're in this season of Christmas where we're supposed to feel joyful, remember the idea of giving thanks as being tied into it. And you know, as we started, the idea of being thankful and taking delight in the Lord, and He'll put the desires in your heart. I think that's what we'll close with. Do you have anything else to say?
That's it.
We'll talk more next week. We're going to skip over to the New Testament, and I think there's a lot to be said in there. Anybody else? Any other comments? God, we are thankful that you've proven, not just to us, but to those who came before us, to the people we know. We do see your hand. And you made provision for our joy. You deliver us and you give us assurance that these things that we mourn over are fleeting. And we're grateful for that. My prayer this week would be for those that suffer during this time, the holidays, when they do often feel depressed, that the people that are with us that hear this, that it would serve as a reminder that you're with us and that you're with them. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys for being there. I hope you guys have a wonderful week.
I like it.
And we will see you
I'll
next
mention
week.
again, yo, here's Jack. Hi, Jack, you're here, but you're not.
He has a cold.
Okay, Sherry, if you would tell Dave that I got 2 really big flounder, and if he comes around, and Kelly, Mary has promised me that you will hear from us today. She's gonna get that done.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Enjoy that flounder. It sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Have a great
Mary.
day.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.